Welcome everyone to the August meeting of the District 23 Zonta Says Now think tank. Please remember to keep your microphone on mute during the presentations and ask any questions in the chat line. We've got a full agenda, so we'll get started. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places we meet from today and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And at each meeting, we like to acknowledge a female Aboriginal leader. Well, today, I want to acknowledge all of the female Aboriginal leaders who've been fueling the voice in the voice debate. The voice at its core is about equality, about making life more equitable for marginalised Australians. Aboriginal women suffer the combined disadvantage of being women and Aboriginal. But how can we as a nation close the gap? There are so many views about the voice. Some think it's great, some think it goes too far, others not far enough. The main thing is that we all have a responsibility to be informed, to listen to all sides of the debate and cast an informed vote. So today I want to acknowledge those who are using their voice from both sides of the debate. Linda Burney, the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Jacinta Napinjimpa Price, the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and Fair Australia, Senator Lydia Thorpe from the Black Sovereign Movement, and also from the Women for Yes campaign, Dr. Jackie Huggins, historian and author, Emily Carter from the Mani Wan Tikura Women's Resource Centre, and Professor Marcia Langton, who's an anthropologist and geographer. Thank you all for stepping up and adding your voice and experience to the debate. It's useful to remind ourselves of the links between increased greenhouse gas emissions and gender inequality, and we use the steam train to describe the links. The train was developed during the Industrial Revolution at a time when humans began to increase their greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Increased greenhouse gas emissions have accumulated to form a blanket around the world and causing a global warming and more extreme weather events. These extreme droughts, floods, storms and fires trigger social disruption, displacing millions of people. And it's this social disruption that magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. Zonta Says Now seeks to stop the train by taking climate action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and closing the gaps in gender equality. We do this with our three tools. We have our website, our think tanks, and our framework for action. We've developed many resources to help us learn how to build a better world for women and girls through taking gender equal climate action, and these can be found on our website. I'll hand over now to Sue Lees to introduce today's speaker. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you. So Charlotte Sterrett is the Yarra Riverkeeper. So the Yarra Riverkeeper is a community organisation that tackles the ecological risks that have had or could have a devastating impact on the Yarra, or the Birrarung as its Indigenous name is used quite widely now. With community support, they aim to protect the Yarra and to keep it healthy. Yarra Riverkeepers is a member of the International Waterkeeper movement of community groups caring for local waterways. So Charlotte's got a really interesting background. She's been involved for over 20 years in climate and environmental justice here in Australia and overseas. She's recognised globally for her work in Southern Africa, supporting local communities and also in, I think, other places in the Asia Pacific region. She's supported communities to build their resistance to climate change. She is a strong advocate of community-based approaches, and she's had senior roles at Oxfam and World Vision, and I think correctly, at one stage, Charlotte, you were the climate Action and Resilience Manager at World Vision. So a wealth of knowledge and experience in how to deal with issues of climate and the environment. So thank you very much, Charlotte, for doing this today, particularly as I realise it's your week off.
No problem, Sue. Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me just share my screen, and then we'll get started. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yeah. All right. Excellent. All right. So I feel like you might have already done a presentation like this. So but anyway, we'll see how we go, and then you can always ask questions. So yeah, as Sue mentioned, I've worked on climate change for about 20 years, and the intersection of climate and gender justice is really important, as is. Well, I see climate as being a justice issue, so it tends to intersect with all the other issues of justice, whether it's gender or racial justice, etc. So I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting. Well, I'm on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land out in Warrandyte in Melbourne. I live on the next to the Birrarung, which is the Yarra, as it's known as well. And just to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to country since time began. What I wanted to say is that why do we need gender and climate justice? I guess everyone would have seen the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been around a little while now, and they took over from the Millennium Development Goals, and there's 17 of those. And there is a specific one on climate action, which is number 13. And then there's specific actions on gender equality as well. But if you look at all 17 goals, you'll see that there is a lot of intersection in terms of zero hunger. Obviously, food security and climate is really important. Life on land, life below water, everything is kind of integrated with climate change and gender as well. And you've got number 10, which is reduced inequalities. So it's all, although they're separate goals, you have to really look at the full picture. And we can't solve the climate crisis without addressing gender injustice. And that's sort of the work that I've been focused on. I have worked internationally for 20 years and decided to do something more local. So I probably have less to do with the gender justice work now. And that's because while women are more affected by climate change than men or gender diverse people, in Melbourne, you don't tend to see that as much. People tend to be much more wealthy. So here is some facts about gender gaps and climate impacts, and then the impacts that exacerbate gender inequalities. So you probably already know some of these facts, that over 50% of the 1.5 billion people living on $1 a day or less are women. Water, water is life. On average, women and children spend 8 or more hours per day collecting water. Globally, women are 16.7% of government ministers, 19.5% of parliamentarians, and 9% of heads of state. So women are really underrepresented in decision making, which means that the decisions that are made don't necessarily have the best outcomes for them. We know that women produce over 60% of food in some countries, particularly in Africa. Women really drive agriculture around the world. And in terms of literacy, 2/3 of the 774 million illiterate adults worldwide are women, and women only own 2% of the world's land. So in terms of gender gaps, there's huge issues, and things are improving in lots of countries, which is great. I know we always talk about the bad news, but in terms of climate change, if you add climate change on top of existing gender gaps, things like crop failure, fuel shortages, water scarcity, natural disasters. Well, I don't think you can say any disaster is natural. There are natural hazards, but disasters are not natural. Disease, displacement, and conflict. Women are really at the forefront of that. So in some of the countries I've worked in, women really are affected by crop failure. They do a lot of the hands-on work on the fields, and they're also responsible for household food production burdens. So when crops fail or when there's less food around, women tend to go without, and girls as well. We know that with deforestation, fuel shortages is increasing as well, and women are usually responsible for collecting that wood. And what does also happen is they experience gender-based violence while they're collecting wood and water, depending on where they are. We know that women tend to die more when there's a disaster. Women are less able to swim, for example. They're usually at home caring. And then after disasters, when there's responses there, they have an increased threat of sexual violence. I saw that when I worked in Vanuatu after Cyclone Pam. And then they're the carers at home. So when there is disease in the home, they are really the ones looking after everybody. In terms of displacement, forced migration means that when women are away from home or their partners, husbands are away from home, they're also more at risk. And then while men are more likely to be injured while fighting, women, suffer greatly from other consequences of conflict, gender-based violence being number one there. And so basically what this says, and you already know this, is that women are at the front lines of climate change, which is really problematic. But what's good is that we do have opportunities to advance gender justice, as well as if we make the right decisions while we're advancing climate justice as well. We've already kind of talked about this. I just want to talk a little bit about the lady on the right here. And I worked with her in Vanuatu, and she was a formidable woman, and she helped set up some of the work that we did with Oxfam around climate action. So she was part of the Vanuatu, setting up the Vanuatu Climate Action Network and the Vanuatu Humanitarian Team, which was interesting because it happened before Cyclone Pam. So Vanuatu was well placed. Her name is Shirley, by the way. Even though she was a leader, she also suffered as well because of being a woman and being a poorer woman as well. And really the answer, the reason why that is because of injustice. So she was a member of a single-headed household and is poor. Many women have lack of access to and control of environmental goods and services. So while they might be the ones working in the fields, they're not the ones making the decisions about where that money goes. As we said before, they not participating in decision-making and leadership. So the decisions that are made don't necessarily help them. And then they have this workload. I've worked a lot on gender programs internationally, and sometimes the work was really well-intentioned, but actually added to women's burden in terms of their workload, which is an important one to think about, that if you're trying to create more income opportunities for women, that doesn't take away the work that they have to do at home generally. So it just adds to that. Gender roles and relations, they take a really long time to change. Again, when I worked in the Pacific, we had a lot of women-led disaster management, local disaster management teams, and it took a long time for the men to respect those women, but they did over time. And then they're ignored in developing solutions. So we talked about that before. I wanted to highlight here, and so I'm just getting a piece of paper out, that there are many female leaders around the world, and these are some of the young ones. I guess quite often we've heard about Greta Thunberg, but there are many other young leaders around the world, Indigenous leaders in particular, who are doing their part for the environment. But I just wanted, as women, or women here, I think we're all women here, to ask yourself these questions. Are you a woman? Sorry, I'm trying to move the people's faces over. Are you a woman? Are you a girl? Are you non-binary? Are you poor? Are you educated? Do you have a stable job, income? So the idea behind this is that issues around vulnerability to climate change as a woman or a non-binary person are always based on other things as well. So I suspect all the ladies on the call here are probably pretty wealthy. maybe even in the 1% of wealth around the world. So really, we're very fortunate. If you're an Indigenous person or an ethnic minority, if you're a woman in a single-headed household, if you're poor, if you have a disability, if you're not educated, you're going to be much more affected by climate change than I am, or probably the people on this call are. So it's very intersectional. So the poorest of the poor, the most disadvantaged, tend to be more affected by climate change, and that's also women. For us in Australia, we do get to participate in decision making at multiple levels. We've got a by-election here next Saturday for our state member of parliament. So we'll all get to participate in that decision making. And our voice is generally more listened to. I've worked in lots of countries where women aren't able to participate in decision making. In the Pacific Islands that I've worked in, they have men's huts. They're not called that, but that's the kind of the rough translation, and that's where all the decision making happens. So women aren't even allowed in those places. So that is changing, but it takes a really long time. So based on how you answer these questions determines how you're impacted by climate change. This slide is really about women as climate champions. So flipping it on its head to saying, yes, women are more vulnerable, women are more affected. However, when you put women in positions of power or in positions of decisions, there are much better outcomes for everybody. So when women benefit, societies win, and we've seen that economically and environmentally as well. Women are great leaders economically. I've been involved in lots of programs where women have set up their own micro businesses, or they've done micro loans, and the sorts of things they're successful in those businesses, but the sorts of things they want to spend their money on is generally related to education of their children. And in Climate Drawdown, I think most people have read that book or know about that movement, and they ranked all of the different things you could do to reduce climate change, to draw down emissions. And the number one thing is to educate girls, which is quite fascinating, because people automatically assume it means, reducing, renewable energy, or stopping deforestation, and all those things are definitely right up there. But the best thing that we can do to reduce climate is to educate girls. And part of that, yes, is around population and having less children, but there are other benefits as well. We know that women turn knowledge into action. I've seen that on the ground in many places in Vietnam, where I've worked. Women are constantly wanting to learn, and they have the solutions. And women are powerful organisers as well. And lastly, that women are better leaders in times of crisis. So they're just really great at multitasking as well. So, so I'm just checking my time. So what can we do? And I've kept this presentation short because I want us to have a good time to have some discussions. But on the right, you can see that there's 9 squares there that talk about what we can do, and some of these are more systemic and generic and than others. But if I can just read through them, is consistently challenge our assumptions and inequalities. So constantly ask questions, share leadership and power, create inclusive and participatory spaces. So we do that all the time. So it's even making sure, when I've been working on different programs overseas, is when we do evaluations or we're developing a program, we make sure there's safe places for women and girls to participate through focus group discussions. Because if you have a lot of women mixed in with men, quite often the women won't speak. You won't get to hear what's going on. So we divide them up, and then still bring them together. We have individual interviews, one-on-ones with women by themselves, and also have different age groups as well, because sometimes there's issues between the younger people and the older people in terms of hierarchy. So there's a whole layer of culture that sits over the top of that. taking a strength-based approach, working out not just where the vulnerabilities are, but where the capacities are, and using those strengths and getting people with diverse skills, being authentic, caring for yourself and others. So I work with this lady in Australia, Charlie, and she'd worked with 350.org and now with Tipping Point, but really, really selfless, but, you know, ended up getting burnt out and having to take quite some time out. So being able to care for ourselves and others, recognizing that the climate crisis is a long-term crisis. I mean, I guess when I started working on it 20 years ago, I mean, I still work hard now, but back then you kind of feel like everything's urgent and you have to get it done straight away. And yes, that's true, but you have to be in it for the long haul. Taking that goes hand in hand with taking time to learn and reflect, having courage and having zero tolerance for any type of violence. So on the left, these are my kind of more practical actions, is to I've worked in lots of organizations that, and we talk about this a lot more now, but it used to be if you wanted to get ahead, you had to kind of become more masculine or adopt those sorts of traditional leadership styles. But I would say now it's much more obvious and acceptable to reject that traditional leadership based on competition and greed and work more collaboratively. I see that all the time now. And it really, really works. And it works not only for gender justice, but for climate justice, because we know capitalism has, well, we know the greed of many, the greed of few hasn't led to the wealth of many, and it's certainly not helped the planet. So if we can reject that competition and greed, then we're going to be able to work in a much more collaborative way. And that leads to, you know, embracing leadership that is based on connection and collaboration. And that helps with innovation as well, if there's a safe place for people to discuss ideas. In my current role as the Yarra Riverkeeper, that's really at the heart of the work that we do, recognizing that we need to have a collective impact and that one organization or one group of people can't do it all alone. Increasing diversity and inclusion. So that's really important. I'd say the environmental movement is still very much dominated by white people, but there is a lot of change in Australia, particularly around, and the Voice to Parliament would be part of that, but traditionally around traditional owners and understanding care of country and what that means, and bringing that into the more dominant paradigm. Some examples of that, I've just come back from Darwin, and you know, cultural burning or cool burning, they're different, but the cool burning, that's just a regular accepted way of going about things, and you just travel through country and they burn off all the time. So that's one area where they've really taken that knowledge and run with it. Developing feminist principles at work. So when I worked at Oxfam, so when was it, 2017, the last time I worked there was a big scandal in Haiti where Oxfam GB workers were found to have engaged in sex work, and I think there was some sexual abuse as well of people after Haiti earthquake. And Oxfam really were in the headlines. And then, you know, since then we've had other organizations, including the UN. There's been lots of discussion about that. So Oxfam really, really revolutionized the way they work. And one of the things they did was kind of strip everything back and develop these feminist principles at work. And some of the things in here on the right are examples of that, but it really, really helped. I think before then people talked about Oxfam being all about gender equality, but people weren't walking the talk. And so I think that's really important. I've done that. Even a small organization can have their own feminist principles, and it's not to be mixed up with women's principles. A lot of people used to say, oh, well, that's, you know, that doesn't make sense because that's going to be unequal for men, and it's like a lack of understanding about what feminist principles are. And then the last one is to fund women-led environmental advocacy and climate action. So we've got some organizations like Wella that have been set up to help with that, but we need much more of that happening. because women do have really great ideas, but they don't tend to get it funded. And I just reflect on the fact that we are in the middle of the Women's World Cup soccer, and how now there's been an announcement of $200 million for women's sport. And it's quite interesting how these things come about, because we know we should be doing this, but because the spotlight's on us, we're doing it now, and it's a really great announceable. But really, that's what we need to do day in, day out, is really fund this work, because we can talk and talk and talk, but until we have funding and the resources set aside, it's not going to happen. So if we do all those things, I think we'll be able to tackle both the climate and gender crisis, and we'll have a bit more racial justice as well. So there you go. So that's my presentation. And Vandana Shiva, who I really admire, said, we are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all. And I think I really do feel that. And I don't apologize for saying that when there are men in the room either. I think men have led us into pretty much disaster since the Industrial Revolution and before then, and it's probably time for women to have a go. Thank you.
Sue, that was brilliant.
All right, so any questions, time for discussion, because I know you probably know all this stuff anyway, but I'm happy to share my experiences and the work that I've been doing. And it's come a long way. Like 20 years ago, people weren't really talking about this, but now gender justice within the climate change work is really prominent.
Brilliant. That's really, you've put everything together really well, Charlotte, and I love your you're trying to bring in your experience, your lived experience of what you've been doing. You touched on the women's versus feminist principles. Did you want to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think quite often, and that's why when I worked at Oxfam, it was quite interesting. There was a bit of pushback even from women in the organisation about, what do you mean? What do you mean by feminist principles? It's this idea that it means women's principles, but actually it's all the things that are on the slide around, rejecting traditional leadership, being authentic, caring for yourself and others, taking a strength-based approach. So when you first think about feminist principles, you think about women, but actually it's just a different way of thinking altogether. So maybe, in some organizations, talking about it in terms of feminist principles may not be helpful, but I think in the long run, it certainly is. It's interesting, in the last few years, I've noticed people talking a lot more about mental health, being more open, being more authentic. In sport, we're seeing that, where people, are talking about mental health issues that they're having, more openness around sexual violence, talking about that. Those are all feminist ways of thinking, being challenging, the assumptions around what we're doing and the inequalities. So, have a look up. I don't know, Zonta, if you have your own feminist principles, but they're certainly not just owned by one organisation. They can be adapted for any organisation.
Excellent. Yeah. More questions?
Hold on. Yes, me. Sorry, I'm trying to raise my hand. So Charlotte, mine is a bit of a comment and a question. So I've known you the last few years in your role as Yarra Riverkeeper. Yeah. And that's a huge job, because it's really the length of the Yarra River, and it involves working with a huge number of different groups. And what I've seen over the time that I've known you is that you've done an amazing job of actually getting so many of those groups together and there was actually, I have to tell you, there was quite a lot of conflict and gradually Charlotte has actually been able to kind of get on top of some of that conflict, and I think you've just done an amazing job from what I've seen. they're getting organisations to work together and getting highly respected within some of those organisations. But you've made the change to the Yarra River, which, I mean, do you think people understand how important a river or a source of water, the environment around the Yarra is? Like, people seem to take so much of this environment for granted, and I see it all the time. And I think, well, this is really primary to your life.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, I think, I mean, the organisation's been around nearly 20 years and made some really good strides forward in terms of policy. I mean, the Birrarung is the only river in Australia that has legislation that protects and acknowledge it as a living entity. And there's a whole movement around rights of rivers around the world and rights of nature. And, you know, some rivers around the world have been given legal personhood, which helps you be able to sue people who, you know, or organisations or even states and countries when they pollute the waters. But yeah, I think you're right. I probably underestimated it as well myself coming into the role, that people just do take our natural resources for granted. And the reason I was attracted to the role is because I've worked in about 25 countries globally on climate change, and I'm always dipping in and out of issues where this was my chance to really get really into the detail of it. And it is really complicated. There's so many stakeholders. It's its own case study in complex governance, an ecosystem, a system-based problem in itself. So even if you just looked at it from a climate change perspective, it's really, really complicated. So yeah, I mean, part of our work is to really educate people and just make people aware of that. I think paradoxically for the river, we get 70% of our water, our drinking water, our potable water from the river. And because it's so clean and hardly, you know, it is like the best water that I've ever tasted in about 50 countries that I've traveled to. We kind of go, oh, so everything's fine because we have really great water. But the reality is we've dammed the river, we've reduced its her flow by about 50%. So we've, you know, kept the good stuff for ourselves and then let, you know, the dregs go back to the river, which has really affected the health of the river and all of the animals and plants that really depend on her. So we're really trying to educate people about that the whole ecosystem matters. We haven't talked so much about climate change in the first year and a half, but it's obviously something I'm really keen to talk about. And we've talked about it a lot, but there hasn't been enough research done on the river in terms of climate change. We know that 80% of all impacts that are climate related are water related. So we ignore this at our peril. Just going back to what you said about leadership, I mean, the research has shown that women are more innovative and also adopt preventative measures at a much faster rate than men in terms of looking after the environment. And a review of around 20 studies from around the world found that the presence of women in conservation and natural resource management resulted in stricter and more sustainable rules, greater compliance, more transparency and accountability, and better conflict resolution. So maybe I'm doing my little bit for that as well. So it's just like a different way of going about it. I mean, I think this idea of bringing people together and collaborating and this idea of collective impact seems really simple, but it's very powerful. But it's amazing how often it doesn't happen. Like, we work with lots of government agencies and they're all part of one government, right? But many of them are in competition with each other. The way we've set up our local councils means that they don't work to support the river because they're all divided up into their own little patch. So governance really matters. So I think when women are in governance positions, they tend to think of the whole rather than themselves or individuals, which means, you know, the public good or the nature's good, it comes out on top.
I see that Jackie's got her hand up. Jackie, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Charlotte, for your presentation. You mentioned, and we're well aware, that obviously the poor and the marginalised people are suffering more, women are suffering more from the impact of the climate crisis. You've worked extensively in 25 countries, you said, on this problem. I'm just wondering if you have any examples where you've managed to have a big impact on people like us, the people that aren't going to be as impacted as quickly as the other group, to get us behind, get us really motivated and working together towards action.
Yeah, I think it's always hard to kind of think about attribution and you know, where you're having your impact, especially when you're trying to build social movements. So I've been involved professionally in lots of social movements around climate change, but also in my personal life before I became the Riverkeeper, mainly around state and federal elections. I was quite involved in the Stop Adani campaign. It is about, fortunately and unfortunately, it is about individual conversations that build the movement, and it takes a long time. And I do worry that we're running out of time, or we've run out of time for climate. In terms of climate, I think we're locked in some pretty serious impacts already, and we're seeing some of the tipping points being reached. But yeah, I'm very hopeful. And I think what's interesting is a lot of the people that I've worked and grown up with working on climate change, I now see them, including myself, in positions of power and decision making. So that will take some time to kind of roll out, but you are starting to see that, and you are starting to see, you know, a lot more women in positions of power. Obviously, we had Jacinta Ardern most recently, and a different type of leadership as a result of that. And it was interesting, you know, with her resignation, that she talked about this job being too not friendly enough, you know, to have family and have a life. And that kind of just shows you how far wrong we've gone in terms of how we organize ourselves, how we govern ourselves. So I think the climate crisis really provides that opportunity for us to really change things up. And you do need a crisis to be able to do that. When I worked in Vanuatu, they had the biggest cyclone on record, Cyclone Pam, which was quite some time ago now. But that revolutionized the way that government organized itself, and they changed the way they govern. Now, having said that, they still don't have any female, well, last time I checked, they don't have any female parliamentarians. So I think educating women and educating girls and women and getting women into positions of power is really where it's at. So, and that means for me in my job, trying to get more women involved in natural resource management, in advocacy. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to build the capacity of local organisations and local leaders, including women, to be able to do that. It's still a bit ad hoc because we're very small. But yeah, I think the grassroots stuff is still where it's at. You've got to work at the top down, but also bottom up, and join those levels together.
Great, thank you.
We've got a comment in the chat line. Pamela Sloss says, thank you, Charlotte. In remote communities here or overseas, have you found local women form their own leadership groups and to have a representative communicate key concerns of the women in their area to the male leaders?
Yes. So some are formal and some informal. I'll talk a bit more about the Pacific, and I'm in Melanesia. I haven't really worked in Polynesia or Micronesia, but they do have, they're obviously religious as well. So they do have women's groups in the Pacific and women leaders. So what's always good to do is not set up new governance structures when you move or when you're working with communities, because those governance structures will tend to only be around as long as the program's funded. So you try and work with existing governance structures. So in the Pacific, we've worked with lots of women's groups and then work with them to make sure they have representation on the larger groups. And I'd say that was kind of happening anyway, but it's more around making sure there's more equal decision-making power, and then providing opportunities for women to shine and to lead, to actually change the way men view them, and then change the gender roles. So disaster risk reduction committees or climate and disaster risk reduction committees are a really good way of doing that. What they found is that women were really, really good at managing finances and making sure they tend to be less corrupt. Then they also tend to identify things that are really good for the public good. The only issue with that is that it can add to women's burden. So you have to work at all levels with that. I have had situations where we've had female leaders still experience domestic violence at home, even though they have been, you know, on a more public level, very vocal. So you have to work at the household level as well. You can't just work at the local community level. You have to work with households. And so it's not just about working with women. I think it's recognised now that you have to work with men and women together so that they grow together rather than men feeling like women are being privileged over them. That's really important, but it takes a long time.
I think it all depends on building the trust, isn't it? So
yeah, that's right. I mean, I did maybe I'll send the link. I did some work with CARE in the Pacific and helped them. Well, I did 5 pieces of work, but it was all really around some gender and resilience research. And we looked at, you know, how you best do that and come up with a bit of a framework. So that's really helpful because, you know, and it's probably advanced since then as well. Oxfam has done a lot of work on what they call gender transformation. So focus on climate change as well. So that it's an evolving field of work. But super fascinating and interesting. I've dipped out of it a bit in the last couple of years though.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, Sue, I'm going to hand over to, is there any other questions from anyone else before we close up the discussion? Just make sure, no hands raised. That's good.
So Charlotte, you said, oh, we might know some of this, some of it, yes. But the thing is that you brought it all together for us because we have little bits of knowledge. And one of the things I have to say is that when people say to me, oh, you know, you're in a women's climate action group, like what are you going to do? What can you do? And you've given us the vision really clearly there. It's not just about, you know, picking things up off the beach, which is always important, but it's about that long-term thinking. It's about that building relationships, building coherence, working out what actual skills we have to contribute and whether we're here or in another part of the world. And I think with Zonta says now going international, it's really important for us to have that coherence around us. So I think we really appreciate that today. And your experience is incredible. And I think we're very lucky to have you on board as somebody who's involved in climate, in gender, in the Yarra River. Amazing woman. Thank you.
No worries. There's a few bits and pieces on. I don't really do consultancy work anymore. I do occasionally when something comes up, it's really interesting. But on my climate concern website, and there's a bunch of stuff on there that some of it's climate and gender related. I just put a couple of things up there. But it's an evolving field. I think like the number one takeaways is for me is that you have to get women in positions of power and decision making inside governance. Governance is like the key to everything. So if you can get that right, then the rest kind of flows. It's not about getting into the minutiae of training women in this and that. That's helpful, but actually the best thing you can do is to get women in those positions of power, because that's good enough. Because if you get the women in those positions of power, they make better decisions anyway in general. Sorry, men, but that is borne by the evidence. So yeah, for me, working locally, making sure there's good representation. Every time we do a talk, making sure that there's equal, if not more, representation of women or First Nations people on panels or on speakers, and just being aware of all that stuff and providing that equity a voice is really important. And that's why the voice to Parliament is really important as well, because we're not asking for very much, but just by having more voices at the table, we'll get better decisions made. But if you don't have that diversity, you don't get that good discussion and those good decisions come out of it.
Yeah, exactly. While you're here, I just want to remind everybody about the Women Taking Climate Action Scholarship, which is $1,000, but more importantly, it is recognition of a woman who's involved in climate action in some way, which can be quite diverse. So people have been sent information, but if you need it again, please contact me. We close on August the 25th, but if somebody wants to make a case for waiting a few more days because they've got somebody who can't do it before then, I'm open to discussion. So Charlotte, we want to take that back to your organisation. I know you've been sent.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you, that's lovely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, for your talk today, and thank you, Suzanne, for introducing and wrapping up with Charlotte's discussion. And the links there I'll share as well on the when we do an email after the event, so everyone's got those. They look really great. Thank you, Charlotte. That's super. I'm sure we'll be in touch again.
No worries. All right. Have a lovely rest of the meeting.
Network of people. It's wonderful. We're all got to collaborate, and if we can help you in any way, just let us know. You know, we've got to have this, wonder web, of women that can actually make a difference. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I was going to mention, are you aware of the Women's Climate Congress?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Congress, yes, it's very good. They cover quite a lot of different angles, and the different webinars they have. It's been very interesting.
Yeah. No, it's good. Okay, lovely. All right, well, enjoy, and feel free to contact me if you need any assistance, and I'll do my best.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye for now. Thanks again. Yeah, so I'll just come back into share the screen and keep us on track. Wasn't Charlotte fascinating? All the experience that she's had. So that's super. The screen sharing okay? Just want to double check. Yep. Everyone's happy. Good. All right. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about disaster management. I had a catch up with our international president, Uta Schultz, the other day, and she'd like to, for Zonta Says Now internationally, to focus on disaster preparedness and management for the next year. She wants Zontans to be ready for anything and to be in a position to help their communities during times of disaster, or at the very least, not be a hindrance to what's going on. Anyway, when we look at the news recently, we've had some horrible things happen in the last few weeks. We look at Yellowknife being evacuated at the moment in Canada, Maui and Hawaii, and Rhodes in Greece, Rhodes Island, all the evacuations. And there's been a lot of talk in the media. Well, recently, the World Meteorological Office announced that we're now in an El Nino event. And I thought it's always useful just to remind ourselves what that actually means.
Australia has long been referred to as the land of drought and flooding rains. This vast, beautiful country is made up of rainforests, beaches, mountains, grasslands, the outback, which naturally ebb and flow with the seasons. These days, our diverse landscape is changing faster than usual due to climate change. So how do our weather patterns interact with the warming climate? What does it mean for regular climate drivers like El Nino and La Nina? And what can we expect for future seasons as temperatures continue to rise?
Australia's climate is influenced by a range of factors, and one of the dominant ones is called the El Nino Southern Oscillation Cycle. El Nino is associated with warmer than average temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, leads to dry conditions across eastern Australia, droughts, and much warmer than average temperatures across eastern Australia. It also has its opposite phase, its sister called La Nina, the little girl in Spanish, which is colder than normal. Ocean temperatures in the Pacific, that's associated with much higher than normal rainfall, flooding, and colder than normal temperatures in eastern Australia. For these sorts of events like El Nino and La Nina, they actually have a typical lifetime of only about 1 year. And so you can go from droughts associated with El Nino to flooding rains associated with La Nina. The impact of climate change on these natural modes of variation is to amplify their impacts. Climate change is happening in conjunction with or on top of the natural climate variations like El Nino and La Nina in the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean dipole. Climate change is amplifying the water cycle so that wet periods, wet seasons get wetter, and dry seasons and droughts get drier. Australia's climate has warmed by about 1.5 degrees since national records began in 1910. With each degree of warming, the atmosphere can hold 7% more water vapour. A warmer and wetter atmosphere also provides more energy for weather systems that generate intense rainfall and stronger storms.
Climate change is really stoking the fires of extreme weather and natural disasters. They're getting closer together, more intense and more damaging. After the 2019-20 fires, they stopped when the heavens opened, and we had massive downpours and floods in March 2020. And then we had a triple dip La Nina. What happens is there's massive growth, particularly in semi-arid areas. History shows that you get massive grass fires after a triple La Nina. In Australia, just watching the fire seasons getting longer by months, the period in which you get the hot, dry, windy weather, fires burning overnight like they do during the day, and that's because of climate change. I don't like this. Nah, out. 2019 wasn't actually a black summer, it was a black winter, spring and summer. In 50 years of firefighting, I'd never seen that before. Fires were so hot, the smoke plumes pushed up into the stratosphere and formed their own thunderstorms. Problem was, no rain. So you'd have lightning coming out of the smoke, starting new fires 30 kilometres away, and it's just that energy in the system is making the winds stronger, it's making those pyroconvective storms more likely. Worldwide, we're seeing the weather patterns change. So we're going to get more bushfires, they're going to be more damaging, we'll have longer fire seasons, more properties destroyed. We're going to see more flooding because the La Ninas are more intense, and there seems to be a condensing of the pattern, more and more drought, heat waves, everything's getting worse.
One thing we know is that with a warmer climate, we will see more extreme heat waves, more bushfires, droughts, floods, and animal extinctions, coral bleaching, and less chance of recovery for our environment. When we look at future conditions and look at climate change projections for Australia, yes, 2019 was the record hottest year across Australia, but a normal year in the late 2030s and 2040s. So any dry year in the 20s, 30s and 2040s is going to have, unfortunately, just as bad bushfire conditions and just as bad extreme temperature conditions that were unprecedented in the Black Summer. Do you want some good news? If we act fast enough to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases in Australia and to meet the commitments globally to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero well before 2050, then we can limit climate change. What the government needs to do is to introduce policies to limit greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, and that means fostering opportunities for solar power and wind power in phasing out all coal mines and fossil gas extraction in Australia and stopping export of coal and fossil gas overseas as well. Australia has a bigger opportunity a better opportunity than any other country to power Australia with solar power and wind power, because Australia has lots of wind. We've got more sunshine than any country in the world. Yes, significant climate change is locked in, but we need to achieve net zero emissions in Australia and globally well before 2050 so that we can stop climate change.
Short video, that one, and explains it quite nicely about the little boy and the little girl that caused disruption. So with El Nino on the way, we need to be ready. And this is why we did the pamphlet recently. And at the last meeting, we shared the draft of the leaflet that's designed to keep Zontians, help Zontians find key information about disasters and how to prepare for them. There are literally hundreds of resources on the internet, and it can be very confusing. So this leaflet provides the starting point for Zontians to prepare themselves and their families, and also to advocate for better disaster preparedness resources in their communities. We've worked with Amanda Lamont and the Australasian Women Emergencies Network board, the board of that, to finalise the leaflet, and we thank them enormously for their input. All of their comments are in the final version now, and they've given us confidence to know that we're on the right track. This first page is mostly focused on how you are prepared for a disaster. So you can see that the leaflet is designed to be read on screen. So what I might do is I can open the PDF version so we can actually see the links, and just go a couple of the links to show you how it all works together. So when you go to any of the links, obviously they'll just take you to the appropriate websites. So the Red Cross is by far the best one for getting prepared, and you're preparing them for an emergency. And when we come back to the Red Cross, has got a ready plan, which is really, really good. You know, what your important numbers are. One comment Amanda Lamont said was, always keep a hard copy of your plan. The temptation is to put everything into your phone and keep it electronically. But if the power's down, you won't be able to access it if your phone is flat. So I thought that was an interesting comment. Also, we have to, she has the Get Prepared app, which is the Red Cross one, which is the Ready Plan on the app. We have what you need to put in your survival kit. So what to put in it, you get packing with the various bits and pieces. Then we look at connecting to the social grid. And this one talks about protecting what matters most. But the main thing with this one, it's quite a long document, but near the end, I'll just find the right thing at the end here. They need to put this in a separate thing. They have connecting to the social grid, and it's these little cards that you print off. And they basically say, if I put it around, hello, my name is so-and-so, I live up the road or whatever. And if there's a disaster, the first people you'll go to are your neighbours. So if you know who your neighbours are, you can help each other. So that's a really useful link. And then we also had, you have the psychological first aid, which you can do. Now, remember that District 23, we have our mental health first aid project, where we can bring communities together to undertake psychological first aid training, mental health first aid training. Think of that as really important when we're actually looking at disaster readiness. So that project is actually a climate ready project too. The mental health is just so important. Be aware that you've got this Register, Find, Reunite program. This gets triggered when the emergency is called. So it will show up when the emergency is actually called in your area. You've got a Recovery Basics website here, which is looking after yourself during and after disasters. And there's cleaning up after an emergency, you know, what to do, where to go, where to begin with it, you know. And then we've got the how to provide help. So how you can help, and often donating money is the best thing that you can do. So so that's the individual help. But then we look about how well prepared Australia is. And obviously everything flows down from the UN Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which provides the principles for each country. And Australia does have a strategy, an Australian strategy for disaster resilience, you know, the national strategy. And what's also happens is that each state has their own state strategy as well. And then each local government has their strategy. So it cascades down, but all roads lead back up to the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. The National Emergency Management Agency is fairly new, but I love this part of it. This first bit here, find disaster recovery services. This is when a disaster has already been identified. Well, not necessarily when you can do it beforehand. So say, for example, you're interested in finding out about bushfires and you need assistance on financial assistance and advice. Your house is burnt down, and I'll do it on my own location, and you can search it. And what it will come up with is, whoops, it's come up, bushfire. These are all the different places that can provide information. So you can see drought aid, assistance packages for firefighters, farm households, rural aid, you know, all sorts of support lines. And there's loads of them, loads of them. So this is a one-stop shop for information. Now, until I'd started doing research for this leaflet, I had no idea that any of these things existed, you know? So it's just really interesting to see what's there. I'll just get rid of that one. My screen's in the way. So that link is very useful. Then we also had, working down, disaster assist. That was the one I was just talking about, where you can select your disaster of the things that are there. We have the interactive map showing where the current emergencies are. So you can see here where she would go to. We'll look at see what's over in the east at the moment. Quite a few things happening, all right? So some of these are where they're doing power lines and updating different things to make the local infrastructure more resilient. Different collaborations that are happening. There's water projects. There's all sorts happening around Australia. So this site is quite useful for having a good look, having a sticky beak at what's happening in your local area. Then we have, I was so surprised. I went on the NEMA site expecting there to be one page that gave you links to all the state and territory contact information. No, they didn't have one. I wrote them a letter and asked them to include it in future web pages, but I had to go around and find a link for every different state. So you know, Jackie, here's yours. This is New South Wales emergency, what you can do. Most of the states and territories have an app that you can download that actually tells you when there's a problem in your area. So these links will help you access the app if there is one for your state or territory, because they don't all have one. The only thing that is consistent across the country is the SES. So that's all the way across. So I'll just stop one. Yes, okay, allow that one. So this just gives you an overview of what emergency relief that they provide. So we're preparing. It's not when there's life-threatening. It's when they can just prepare and help you go through a disaster time. Non-life-threatening emergency relief. Then we've got all the local governments that you can go to. But then there's other agencies. Gender and Disaster Australia. I mean, this one I found was an amazing website, and it shows you what the experiences are, the different experiences for men and women. And it talks about all their evidence research. There's lessons in disaster training, what participants have said. There's all sorts of stuff on this website as well. So, you know, they've got all their resources, you've got all their free resources, they've got all their training, you've got postcards and things that they do. You know, they've got all these, you know, these are different ones, the Men on Black Saturday. Remember, Zonta says now to gender equal climate action. It's about men and women. Okay, it's how we can just make sure that the impacts of climate change they help, the responses help everybody. So there's just a fine point to remember there. Then we also have the Australian Institute for Disaster Relief. Now, this one, again, it's just so much information here of the different awards that they can have, the handbook collection, different education programs. There's all sorts, you see. And remember, I've narrowed these links down in the leaflet, all right? So these are just some of the key ones. And obviously BOM. BOM has some great warnings of what current warnings are present in each state and territory. So it's always useful to go back to BOM too. We also have the emergency alert. Now, this is a system, a national emergency warning system, where emergency services send voice messages to landlines or text messages to your mobile. So you can sort of, if you ever get a call on your mobile from this number with all the 4s on, that is from the emergency alert service. So don't delete that call, you know, be aware that it exists. But you can sign up for these as well, you know, just to be aware that they're there. Our Emergency Plus is the one that uses smartphones, and this one you can download the app, and so you can have all the emergency services on this particular app wherever you are. So you can just press this one. It's developed by the emergency services themselves, and it includes what 3 words. Now, I don't know if you've heard of what 3 words, but what it does is it basically tells you where you are. And so if you were looking at that little square, 3 meter square, that would be interpreted, instead of having a long GPS code, it would be Geese Mirror arrives. That's where that location would be. So if you wanted that one, that little square there would be Bland Random Wash. And this What 3 Words app translates your GPS position into 3 words. So you can use this app and say, I'm Canary Wash Bland or whatever, and the emergency services know exactly where you are. Amazing, amazing thing. So that's that one, What 3 Words. Oh yeah, and even Australia Post has got a digital ID thing, so as you can actually get your passport, driver's license and biometrics registered and accredited before a disaster. So if you don't have those things on you, they're all there. So people know that they exist. So there's a lot in this little leaflet, and we've tried to keep it just to 2 pages. So it's just amazing to be aware of it. But you can see why it's a non-printable leaflet. It can only be viewed online.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Is that leaflet available yet, or is it soon to be launched?
What we're going to do is we're going to launch it at the District 23 conference on the 1st of September. And I'll just put that up there.
Carol, Leslie here.
Yeah.
The things you could suggest is, yes, you get that leaflet electronically, but set up the links in a favourites folder on your internet browser, so that you can just go straight to it without having to find your leaflet.
Yes, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Excellent idea. So we've done the leaflet. It's designed to be read on screen. So what I wanted to talk about was how we can actually raise awareness, like you've suggested, with having the hyperlink. And what I was going to do was to put you in a couple of small groups, so you can just have a little chat and see what you reckon. So what sort of things did you come up with? I know that Sandra, you were in one room, and Leslie, you were in another. What were this? I mean, you only had a couple of minutes, but what did you come up with? Anything?
Just that I think in our group was that once it's launched, we really need clubs to take it on board, to be sharing it and trying it out at the club level. And Catherine said, you know, in Victoria we have the Natural Disasters app, and you can see lots of things on there all the time. Yeah, so we need to get it out there. And I saw somebody else put a message in that, you know, then we can spread it out within our own communities to libraries and places like that. So, yeah. Leslie?
Yep. Yeah, so yes, libraries came up. We also just talked about sharing the leaflet with all the service organisations that we have in our community that would pick it up and be able to share it even further, because they'll often support in when there's a disaster. Libraries, yes. Councils, I thought maybe the key would be the local government association and get it shared out through all of the councils, rather than us all attempting to tackle our mayors or council people. And banks also often have a disaster resource page on their websites. So that was another area. Well, often there's a need for financial support, and people tackle that, and those links would be useful for other areas of support that they need. Yeah, so yeah, that's about where we got to.
That was only in a minute. My God, imagine that would be honestly, everybody, if you have some great ideas on this, please email them to me, and so I can just consolidate them and share them around the tracks. So I think that would be really useful. So what I just want to talk about is give you a quick update on what's been going on internationally. You may not have seen these yet. They'll be uploaded to the international website soon. And when we have the Zonta International Statement on Climate Change, it has lots of recommendations. And we've taken each recommendation and made an action guide around it based on the framework for action that we developed. There'll be living documents, so they will update as new things get added. But this, for example, is the disaster preparedness and response one. So we have the recommendation that's covered in the action guide from the climate change, statement on climate change, and then we work our way through the gather the facts, etc. So this was done as a result of the inspiration from doing our own leaflet, okay? So, so we have all the 5 stages. So we gather the facts, lead by example, use our voice, advocate and collaborate, and there's just different actions that you can choose to do on them. It's designed as a starting point to get people's juices working, and they can go yes or no if they want to do that or not, as their own little guide, as an indication that they're not expected to do everything.
Carol, did you create that?
Oh yeah, there's the working group. We've been working behind the scenes for doing all sorts. We've been working for quite a few months, and everything is now just coming out at once. You know, it's amazing.
Oh, good on you. This is fabulous. I'm loving this.
We've had 2 leaflets that we've been putting together, the framework on gender equal climate action and the framework, the FAQs. They're already on the resources part of the Zonta International website. So when you go to zonta.org, go to the Our Causes in the top left-hand side, drop-down list, select Zonta Says Now, and it shows this. We did the 3 surveys for members, clubs and governors, and they were released last night or yesterday. So I got mine this morning.
Yeah.
And so you'll have seen those. Those ones are, we couldn't release those until the strategic plan came out, and that came out a couple of weeks ago. So we were able to now release those surveys. And we have our intercontinental think tanks. I just want you to be aware that Christine Trenorden is going to be the speaker at the September meeting, which is coming up for the intercontinental. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to plug the Women Taking Climate Action Award. Closes on the 26th. We've been promoting it through lots of places, like Sue mentioned earlier. And Sandra, did you want to say about conference? Anything about conference?
Yes, we're pretty excited. We've got a lot of people coming to conference, including 2 members of our new E-Club, which has just been chartered as of Thursday. Well, according to America, we got it yesterday. So that's great. We've got a new club in District 23. Natalie Isaac has confirmed as our keynote speaker and is flying across to Western Australia. And between Carol and Natalie, they're going to give us a great presentation on what the world looks like and how to make a better world. So we're really looking forward to that. And Carol has been in Sydney and met up with Natalie. So we're looking forward to a great conference, and we're just, you know, getting down through all the tic-tacs at the minute. But yeah, another week and I'll be heading over, and Kay will be heading over too. So looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well,
I'm very much looking forward to that session, Carol, with you and Natalie, because as everyone's probably aware, I've chosen Build a Better World as the theme for the conference. And the reason for that was that I thought it would be useful to reflect on what that might look like, and then have a look at what we're doing and what else we might do about it. So so Carol and Natalie will be starting us off with what it looks like.
we're having fun with that. And then this came from Vicky Carmen Brown, who sent her apologies for today, but she went to the Right Here, Right Now book launch in Launceston recently, which was done by Natalie with Bridget Archer, the MP, and she was signing the book Right Here, Right Now, and she said they both spoke so well on climate action. She was signing her book Right Here, Right Now, but more particularly promoting her unique idea, Host a Get Together. The strategy is designed to get women together over morning or afternoon teas to share ideas. Her format was simple, not too prescriptive, and just focused enough to discuss one or two main themes. I invited 5 women to my home and it flowed so well. We all came away more inspired and supported with a personal action or two to follow through with. So that's lovely. So if you go on the 1 Million Women website, they've got the I'm Ready campaign materials, and Natalie's done some fantastic work in this area. Oh, I meant to mention her book, Right Here, Right Now, is available as a podcast on the ABC Listen app for free. Each chapter is a separate podcast ranging from 15 minutes to 45 minutes. And it's great. You can do the gardening while you're listening to the podcast. Then we had Dawn. She sent me her Bush Heritage Australia leaflet update the other day, a newsletter update. National Science Week is this week, which had totally slipped my mind. And Bush Heritage Australia has a Seeding the Future program where they give guidance to early career conservationists, and they can help university student placements, paid internships, and research collaboration. They also have a podcast called Big Sky Country that's got some good short things on it. But they also, in their newsletter, were talking about their 1 million tree project with partnering with Carbon Positive Australia. And I thought I'd mention this because at the Zonta Club of Perth, we've partnered with the Golden Z Club of St Catherine's College and Carbon Positive Australia. And in the last couple of months, since March, we've raised enough funds to fund over 300 trees to be added to the list. So we're making our way towards the 1 million. And the other thing I liked was that they recycle products. So use recycled goods to create habitat for wildlife. So this is where all of the old farmland was. So there's nowhere for the beasties. So they put these bits of pallets and corrugated iron and old bits of wood together to make hidey holes for the reptiles and beasties, which I thought was a new way of looking at recycled materials. Anyway, you've probably seen in the news that Anjali Sharma strikes again, and not daunted by missing out on their class action being overturned last year. She's come back on board and is working with Senator David Pocock to bring in that private members bill to change the Climate Change Act so that the government will have a duty of care to consider future generations in its decisions, which is marvellous. We've got a couple of new banners that you'll see at conference. There's a new pull-up one and a new across one, which will hopefully we can all stand behind and get some photos. And that's basically the main things I wanted to cover today. But was there any other news that you would like to share before we finish?
I'm good.
You good? Everyone good? If there is anything which you think of later, email me and then we can share it via a post or something. Okay, so that's super duper. As always, don't forget to consider donating to the foundation or endowment fund. Celebrate your birthdays, anniversaries, or simple just thinking of you days. Be nice to get an email saying that someone's done that. And they're great for donations, are great for speakers as well. And you can leave them in the will as well. And obviously, congratulations to the Matildas. They may have been down the other day, but they are definitely not out as far as the Australian public is concerned, because they have really raised awareness of gender equality throughout the nation. I went to a match in Perth with Morocco versus Colombia, and all the adverts were all on gender equality. It was just brilliant. So they've really raised the profile. So congratulations to them. So our next meeting is in October, 21st of October, after conference. And you notice that we have the system of registering now, so that enables the meeting to actually show in your diaries. So just spread the links far and wide, and just see that we can help share our climate journey, because it's so important that we can build a better world for women and girls. So on that point, I think that's it for today. So email me if you've got any questions, and don't forget to check out the information on the website. And thanks again for your contribution and participation today. And remember to keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun on your Zonta Says Now journey. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Fabulous as usual.
Yes, yes.